What's up guys, Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video we're going to model a piece of site terrain and we're going to add a road to it as well as retaining walls. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to take this piece of terrain and I want to model it out so that I have a road on it with retaining walls. I want the road to slope, so a little bit more advanced than maybe some of the tutorials you've seen. So there's a few steps here. I'm going to use a few extensions, but first off, what I want to do is I want to draw where my road is going to go. And in general, I recommend when you're dealing with a terrain like this one, that you draw what you actually want to place on the terrain flat. And so to do that, I'm just going to draw a line down right here. And then I'm just going to tap the R key and tap the up arrow key to lock this to the blue axis. And I'm going to draw a flat surface like this. And so when I draw a flat surface, what that's doing is that's giving me a surface where I can come in here and draw my road. And generally speaking, what I want to do is I want to, first off, we're going to call this site. So I've just renamed this, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do an edit, copy, edit, paste in place. And I'm just going to call this site backup. And I'm going to turn that off. So now I've got a backup of my terrain in case something goes wrong with this in here. Right now, drawing that road in here could be a little bit tricky, right? So if I toggle this off and I look at this, I can draw the road on here, but there's no like reference or anything like that. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to take that site and I like to generate some contours from it. And there's an extension in the SketchUp extension warehouse called Contour Maker from TIG. And so if we look at Contour Maker, and you can just download that through SketchUp and install it, what it does is it allows you to take a surface and create contours from it. So if I select this surface and click on contours, it's going to ask me what I want the spacing to be. In this case, I'm going to do it in 1 foot increments right here. I'm going to click on OK. And so what Contour Maker does is it'll come in here and it'll use this elevation, so your origin elevation as your base, but notice how every foot it's got a contour in here. And so that's great because what I can do, and I'm going to toggle this site off, is that gives me a little bit more of a reference. And I'm going to come in here and there's some stuff that got created that just needs to be cleaned up a little bit. So I'm just going to click and drag across this and just erase this out. But what that does is that gives me a reference that I can then take and I can use the stamp or drape function in order to drape this onto my flat terrain right here. And so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a group and I'm going to copy this as well. So I'm just going to do an edit, copy, edit, paste in place, or we're just going to call this flat plane backup. I always like having backups because if something goes wrong, then I have the original stuff still in there. But what I want to do is I want to take this and I want to drape it on this terrain right here. And then I can go ahead and I can toggle those contours off. The reason I wanted to drape that on this terrain, and we're going to make sure it all got placed in the group, it looks like it did, but what that does is that gives me a two-dimensional reference in here. And I'm going to go ahead and go into a top-down view right here, and I'm just going to do a camera parallel projection. So I'm in a straight down view right here. And so now what I want to do is I want to draw in where my road is going to go. And so now I can kind of see where the hills and valleys were that were created in here. And so that means that I can basically use, right now I'm just going to use the arc tool. A lot of people use a tool like Fredo Spline to do this because it gives you a little bit better curve editing capabilities, and I think that's definitely a valid way to do that, but I'm trying to avoid the paid extensions as much as I can in this tutorial, though I don't think we're going to be able to avoid it fully. We'll just kind of see where it goes. And I don't want to do anything too crazy for this tutorial. I just want a road that kind of curves along the surface like this. And so what I've done is I've created this flat curve right here. Well, now I'm going to take this curve and I'm just doing a shift click and I'm just going to offset that by whatever the thickness of my road is, like this. So in this case, we're going to say that my road is going to be 20 feet wide right here. And you may need to come in here and just kind of continue this curve a little bit. So I'm just going to use the arc tool in order to do that. We'll just go right here. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to toggle off that flat terrain. And I'm going to draw a line across this surface and a line across this surface in order to close this out. and you want to make sure that you draw that line all the way through the edge right here. And what that's going to do is that's going to create this flat surface, and it tapers a little bit in here. I'm not really worried about that for this tutorial. We're just going to say this is our road profile. And so remember that we've got our site right here, and we want this road to be draped along this surface. And so I'm going to use the move tool in copy mode, and I'm going to create a copy of this up like this. And so what that's done is that's given me the geometry that I'm using for my road in here, and it's basically given me that in a way that I can now work with it down below. Now there are a few tools inside of SketchUp itself that you can use. I'm going to toggle parallel projection off. There's a few tools in sandbox tools that you could use here, but you probably don't want to. So the first thing you could do is you could just take this and you could just drape it on that surface right here. Personally, I don't really need or want to do that, just because what that's going to do is that's just going to drape these edges down, and it's going to give me a whole bunch of faces, but it doesn't really like flatten this space out or anything like that. So in this situation, not really the tool that I want to use. And so what I want to do instead is I want to use a tool called the stamp function. And so what the stamp function does is it takes a two-dimensional object like this one and it stamps it down into the terrain right here. And so what I want to do is I want to select this, I want to activate stamp, and I want to stamp this down. Now in this situation, remember that we want to create a road that has a retaining wall on either side of it. So in this situation, we don't want to have a big slope in here, but remember that there is a function in here for offset. And with a function like offset, what I can do is I can type in a value of 10 feet. Notice how you get this red line in here. For whatever reason, that line doesn't update unless you restart the tool. But when I typed in a value of 10 feet, notice how what this would do is this would kind of give me a slope away from my road like this. Now, there are times that that can be valuable, but this isn't one of the times because we want to keep the terrain close to the road. So instead, what I want to do is I want to activate that tool, but I want to type in a very small value. So I'm going to do something like a quarter of an inch. So I'm going to type in 0.25, hit the enter key, and then I'm going to rerun this tool just so I can kind of see where that's going to be. And notice how here that gives me a very small slope instead of a big one. I wish you could set it to 0, but you can't. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click in here, and notice what that does is that allows me to set where this road is going to go inside of SketchUp. So I can move my mouse up and down, and in this case I'm going to move it to about this point right here. And what that's done is that's stamped this road into this terrain, which is great. That's kind of what we want it to do. But this is not the final result that we're going for. But now let's double click in here, and because I'm going to add a wall in here, I don't really want this terrain anymore. And honestly, probably what you should do when you do this is figure out what the thickness of your wall is going to be. So in this case, my wall might be 12 inches thick, and I might stamp this based on 12 inches based on instead of a quarter of an inch. That's still going to give me a pretty straight up and down view. But now when I come in here and I erase out this face, the gap in here is going to be about the same as the gap of the thickness of my wall. But now what you want to do is you want to erase out all of these edges. And probably the best way to do this, in my opinion, would be to go into parallel projection mode. We want to just jump into a front view or a back view, whatever lets you see this. But I can come in here and I can just click and drag in order to erase out all these edges, and that's going to give me a gap. And there might be a couple of these where you have to rotate out of this front on view, but this should let you get most of them. Okay, and so what we've done here is we've basically created our three-dimensional surface like this so that it's ready for our walls. And so what I want to do now is I want to take this whole thing and I want to offset it out because I'm going to use this surface in order to generate my walls. And in this situation, I just want to offset them by whatever the thickness of my walls is going to be. In this case, it's going to be 12 inches like this. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to split this out so that I've got my walls as objects that I can bring down into SketchUp. And you can erase out these ends because you don't need those. And remember, this is 100% flat. So what I can do is I can double click, I can do a shift double click, And I'm just going to make a copy of these using the move tool. So tap the control key with the move tool active. I'm going to move this down in order to create my wall profile in here like this. And so now I've got these two walls in here and I can do whatever I need to with them. So in this situation, I'm going to push pull this wall down right here. And one thing that you can do is you can come in here and you can split this out. So for example, and it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. For a lot of applications, you can just push pull this down through and that's good enough. So for example, if you're not modeling out the depth in there to anything specific, you can just kind of push pull this down like this. But the other thing you could do is you could also kind of split this up. So if you just draw a line across surfaces like this, you can kind of step them kind of the way that you might actually do a retaining wall. Now obviously this all kind of depends on your geotechnical conditions and things like that, so it really kind of depends on what you're trying to do. But if you did want to be a little bit more detailed, you could just use the push pull tool there. But you've got one wall right here, and I'm going to go ahead and triple click on it and make it a group. And then I've got my other wall over here. And again, I'm just going to push pull this down so that we're through. We'll push pull it up like this. And again, probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the places where I need to split this wall out. So over here, right, this wall is probably going to step up. It might just kind of follow a curve right here, depending on how you want this constructed. But in this case, we're just going to say that it's going to step up. Or we're just going to push pull it up like this. And we've got our second wall. And I'm just going to triple click. I'm going to make that a group as well. So now what we want to do is we want to bring our road in here. And so what I don't really particularly want to do in this situation is just have my road be flat. So if we wanted our road to be flat, we're pretty much done. So I'm going to get rid of these wall edges in here. So if we wanted our road to be flat, we'd be pretty much done. We can just use the move tool in copy mode, copy this down. So not that big of a deal from that standpoint. But in this situation, I actually want this road to kind of slope up the way that a road might in the real world. And so to do that, I'm going to use a couple tools from Fredo 6. And you can download both of these from the SketchUpEssentials extension store as well. But the first one is called Fredo Tools. So Fredo Tools is a tool set from Fredo 6 that allows you to do a ton of different things. Actually, there's a bunch of stuff in Fredo Tools, and I probably need to make sure that it's enabled. So we're going to scroll down to Fredo Tools. Okay, it is enabled. We'll just use his menu bar right here. But I'm going to click on the drop down, and there's a tool contained in Fredo Tools called Curvature. And what Curvature does is it allows you to take a surface and shear it upward. So in this case, I'm going to select Curvature. It's going to let me set a side, and then it's going to let me set the height that I want this to go up. So in this case, over this whole length of this road, I want this to go up maybe 7 feet. So I'm going to type in a value of 7 feet. I want to make sure that I select the option for generate in a group. So we're going to say yes. And notice how it gives me this pretty terrible result. The reason we're getting this pretty terrible result is you need to make sure that you weld the two curves into singular curves. So I'm just going to select these and do a weld edges. Whoops. One more little piece over here. We'll do a weld edges. Notice how now these are uninterrupted curves. Well, now if I select these edges, run Curvature like this, it's going to have my road slope up. But I want it to slope in the other direction. So we're just going to select, whoops, the option for reverse curve orientation and click on OK. That'll make it move in the other direction. And so now what I've got is I've got a surface in here that actually moves up 7 feet over this duration, like this. And so now I'm just going to double click in here and I'm going to erase out my edges. Now, one thing that you could do with this, because we really want this to be a surface, we don't want this to be just a collection of edges, because if I move this down, we're going to get rid of this right here, but if I move this down, there's no road surface in here. All right, so what I want to do is double click in here, erase out these edges like this, and now we've got a surface. And so there's a few ways that you can create a road in here, or a surface in here. So one way to do it is just to use the From Contours and Sandbox tools. What that's going to do is that's going to create a surface using triangulation. I could do a view hidden geometry in here and you could see this. Then you can just erase out most of these edges. That's a valid way to do this. There's a lot of cleanup involved though, getting in here on kind of like these edges right here and making sure there's no additional surfaces, but you can definitely do that. All right, so in addition to being able to do that with Sandbox tools, you can also use some third-party extensions to do this that create better topology. And so one of the ones that I'm going to use is Soapskin and Bubble that you can download from the SketchUp extension warehouse. And so what you can do with Soapskin and Bubble is you can select a closed-end perimeter like this road that we've created. And remember that this is going up by 7 feet, but you can select the whole thing by triple clicking on it. And then you can activate Soapskin and you can type in the number of divisions that you want in here. In this case, I'm going to type in a value of 30 and I'm going to hit the enter key. And so when I do that, what that's going to do is that's going to create a surface within the road right here that's more quad. It's got better topology than the topology we created using Sandbox tools. And then notice how I can move that in here like this, and you can kind of drop it within the walls. So alternatively, another option would be using Curveloft's skinning tool. So Curveloft is a paid extension from Fredo 6 that allows you to create skins. But in the case of Curveloft, you've got a little bit more control over the topology that's created in here. So notice how I can create this kind of quad based like this, other things like that. Now, one thing that I've done in the past, and I'm not going to do it here, but one thing that I've done in the past is I have used Fredo Spline to even out the number of segments on these curves. Now that can affect your curve, but at the same time, your topology can get a little bit better. So you could select these two edges and even out the number of edges in here. Notice that you don't get this issue with Soapskin in the same way. So you can use Curveloft to create a skin in here, and a lot of times it makes sense, but I think I like the topology that's created by Soapskin and Bubble better. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this out. I'm going to take this, make it a group, and we're just going to call this the 3D profile, and I'm going to keep it in case I need it, but I'm going to toggle it off. And then the only thing I need to do now is probably soften the geometry on this road. So you can select it and you can go down and use the soften edges function in order to do this. So I'm going to double click in here. I'm going to select this and I'm just going to select the option for soften coplanar. That's going to soften all of the edges that are in there like this. But then the last thing I would probably do is come in here and adjust my walls so that they're a little bit taller. And in this situation, you might have a wall that just like slopes up, but a lot of the time when you deal with a wall like this one, you're really going to be more using something that steps. So we might move this over here like this, draw a little line across the face like this, and we're going to push pull this up right here. And so now we've got a three-dimensional wall in here like this. And so one other thing, and you can't really see it now because it's hidden by our road, but one other thing that I don't think I showed in this video, I actually lost a little bit of a recording, so I had to re-record some of this, but let's toggle off our 3D road. If you ever do run into this issue where you have the line on the inside of your wall, like this, that's because your terrain is running all the way through the wall. And there's a couple ways you could go about fixing this. You could intersect that with your model, because if you look at this, notice how your wall is intersecting with your model right here. So you could just triple click on this whole thing, do a right click and intersect faces with model. And then if I toggle my site wall off like this, you could come in here and you could erase all of those edges. So that's one way to go about this. Another way to go about this is you could just hide those edges. So to do that, you can just use the eraser tool. And I'm just going to hold the shift key. And actually there's even a better way to do that, which is there's a tool in the SketchUV toolset. So SketchUV can be downloaded from the SketchUp extension warehouse. It's called the Smart Path Select tool. But what it does is it's really good at selecting edges in a model and helping you select a path, right? So I'm just going to move my mouse and notice how it's allowing me to select this path of edges really quickly. And sometimes it can act a little bit funky, so you might just want to take this selection. But I'm just going to go up in here and I'm going to, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle hide. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow me to hide the edges that are in there. So I'm just selecting those edges using this tool like this, and then we'll just toggle those edges to hidden. So then you don't have to actually erase out anything in here. You can just hide those edges. And in this case, it doesn't matter because that's going to be under your road, but on this back wall, sometimes it matters. So that's another way to hide this without destructively editing your walls. And same thing with these seams right here. You can activate the eraser tool and hold the shift key in order to hide edges like this. So I can hide these edges so that I have this nice smooth wall that's in here, just like this. All right, so leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought. If you have any questions about anything we talked about, I just love having that conversation with you guys. If you do want to learn a little bit more about how to use SketchUp, make sure you check out my course. I'll link to that on this page. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.